right, let's get started here. Welcome, everybody. This is the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at the University of South Dakota. We're coming to you from quite a few different places today. Stacy and I are in Sioux Falls, and our instructor Holly is in Vermilion. And we have members here from, I know Kathy's from Brookings. We've got people from other places as well. We are so glad to have you here. We've been doing these Ollie Shorts all month, and this is the final week of Ollie Shorts, which kind of makes me sad because I love these. But today we're going to have some advice from Chuckie D. And if you haven't figured it out yet, who Chuckie D is, I'm going to let our instructor Holly tell you all about it.
Take it, that's my cue. So Chuckie D is sometimes referred to as Charles Darwin when I'm talking specifically about my life-size cardboard cutout of the fine gent. That's when he's most typically referred to as Chuckie D. So anyway, we'll go ahead and get started here for today. So each year, there's hundreds of Darwin Day events held around the globe, and the events are held on or around February 12th, which happens to be the birth date of Charles Darwin. And he shares a birthday to the year with Abraham Lincoln, who's our 16th president. They're both born on February 12th, 1809. Turns out, though, that Darwin had more in common with Lincoln than date of birth. In the US, we generally credit Lincoln with abolishing slavery, but Darwin, too, was a staunch abolitionist. He had witnessed slavery in both the Americas and Europe and found it repugnant. It's fair to say that Charles Darwin was an early champion of diversity and inclusiveness. I think that Darwin would have particularly enjoyed a line in The Color Purple by Alice Walker, except everyone else as a child of God or as one mother's children. The American Humanist Association is the lead agency charged with amplifying the International Darwin Day Foundation's call for celebration, activism, and international cooperation for the advancement of science, education, and human well-being. The mission of International Darwin Day is to inspire people throughout the globe to reflect and act on the principles of intellectual bravery, perpetual curiosity, scientific thinking, and hunger for truth as embodied in Charles Darwin. So today, even though we're quite a ways off of February 12th, we'll celebrate Charles Darwin. The call is for advancement of science, education, and human well-being. And today, our focus is going to be on human well-being. Darwin's typically recognized as the man who wrote Origin of Species, which was published in 1859, in which he elaborated on and provided empirical evidence for natural selection as a primary mechanism for change in species across time. For that and other contributions, he's typically recognized as a great scientist. But my personal contention is that he was capable of making such great contributions because he was not only a great scientist, but also a great naturalist and humanitarian. As a humanitarian, he cared very much about human well-being. And in all these capacities, scientist, naturalist, and humanitarian, he possessed and demonstrated two characteristics: grit and awe. Grit is characterized by passion and perseverance. A person with true grit sets goals and works hard to follow through on commitments. Awe is a little bit more complicated. It can be thought of as a complex feeling. It can often be a combination of wonder, marvel, and reverential respect. Awe can be inspirational and can serve as a catalyst for change. And I'd like to encourage you to celebrate Darwin every day by demonstrating awe and grit and by fostering it in yourself and others. This awe thing is also going to be a part of the focus today. So we're going to be talking a little bit about awe and human well-being. But first I want to back up a little bit and just kind of provide some information to help connect the dots a little bit. So in 1859, that was when Origin of Species by Darwin was published. I like to think of that as his scientific masterpiece. And as it turns out, I've got a shirt over here, and the shirt says, "There is grandeur in this view of life. From so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved." Well, that's literally the last sentence from Origin of Species. And that'll be coming up again later. I sometimes talk about the trilogy as far as what I think of as his three primary contributions. So Origin of Species would be the first of those. Second would be Descent of Man, which was written in 1871. And I sometimes like to refer to that as his humanitarian masterpiece. And the third of the trilogy is entitled Expression of Emotion. And by the way, the titles I'm giving you are the short versions, the ones that people typically say rather than citing a 10-word title for something. And in Expression of Emotion, this is where Darwin expressed the idea of the universality of expression of emotion. What's meant by that is if you travel around the world or across time in various cultures, the way that people express core emotions such as happiness, sadness, disgust, fear, the facial expressions associated with each of those emotions are in fact universal. They're pretty much the same no matter where you go across time, suggesting that it's not something that's learned as opposed to something being innate. And then interestingly enough, in the 1970s, a psychologist by the name of Paul Ekman replicated the work of Darwin. And when I say replicated, he really took it quite a bit further. What was expected scientifically in Darwin's day was a little bit different than what was expected with the more rigorous research methodology of experimental psychology in the 1970s. So Darwin basically replicated the work, improving on it by upholding it to the scientific standards that would be expected of a good research project during the heyday of rigorous experimentalism within science. So Ekman was a huge fan of Darwin, so he replicated and improved upon it, not so much because he thought it was poor work, but rather to do it to the standards that would be typical of the Ekman era. And then interestingly, there's a student of Ekman by the name of Dasher Keltner, who fairly recently wrote a book entitled Awe, the New Science of Everyday Wonder and How It Can Transform Your Life. So we're talking today about awe and human well-being, and I just kind of wanted to connect the dots a little bit there between Darwin, his awe for nature, and then the reverence that both Ekman and Dasher Keltner had for him. So they're both huge fans of Darwin and went on to replicate his work and to do work specific to the concept of awe, which was not something that Darwin did research on, but it's certainly something that he demonstrated that I think is particularly important. Okay, so moving on. Like I said, I just wanted to be able to connect the dots there to know that this concept of awe and the fellow that's most prominent in doing research on awe is someone that's connected, so to speak, to Darwin. So Charles Darwin, the scientist, naturalist, and humanitarian, was a man of many hats. One of the ways a naturalist can be distinguished from a scientist is that one of the characteristics most typical of a naturalist is that they're truly awed by nature. A scientist might study nature, but may or may not be particularly awed by it. Darwin's awe of nature is something that he shared with his children. Spending time exploring meadows was not something most Victorian fathers did with their children, but Charles Darwin certainly did, and did it a lot. I'm certain those activities enriched his relationship with his children, but I'm also convinced that his awe of nature and his habits of sharing that with and inspiring his children also enhanced scientific thinking. So here today, I will share some advice from Chuckie D. What might he want to tell us here in 2024? In recent years, scientists have documented the association between exposure to nature, that thing with which Chuckie D was awed, and positive health benefits. This includes improved cognitive function, brain activity, blood pressure, and mental health, including relief from depression and anxiety, as well as improved physical activity and sleep, and less chronic disease. I'm sure that Chuckie D would be pleased to hear that, but I think he'd probably add some commentary. He would want to remind you that exposure to nature really means being present, being in the moment, not being distracted. Using the parlance of 2024, Chuckie D would say that It isn't really just exposure to nature that yields a benefit, but rather being awed by nature, being immersed in nature. Awe has been defined by Keltner of UC Berkeley as the feeling of being in the presence of something vast that transcends your understanding of the world. He goes on to add that awe can be triggered from moments like seeing the Grand Canyon or witnessing acts of kindness, noting that it's critical to our well-being, just like joy, contentment, and love, other emotions. And that it has health benefits, including calming down the nervous system and triggering the release of oxytocin, the so-called love hormone that promotes trust and bonds. He's the author of a recent book, Awe, The New Science of Everyday Wonder and How It Can Transform Your Life, which as of last month is now available in paperback. Distraction, though, is an enemy of awe. If we are distracted, we're not really paying attention. As much as most of us like to think that we can multitask, we really aren't as good at it as we'd like to believe. There always is a cost, even though we might not realize it. To be present, to be in the moment, to be immersed, yep, it means ditch the phone. The phone is a distraction. Multitasking, as we end up doing when the phone is present, is a distraction, and it keeps us from truly being exposed to things like nature in a beneficial way. It keeps us from being immersed. It sets us up to fail to be present, to miss out on the moment, to be unable to experience awe. Chuckie D wants to remind you that you need awe in your life. Like Keltner has said, it is critical to our well-being. Chuckie D wants to remind you that one could look up and see the stars in the sky, but preferably one should gaze into the sky, truly being in the moment, being present to experience the awe that the universe offers. One could merely look at the sun during a solar eclipse, but preferably one should settle and savor the quieting and the sights and sounds of the experience. One could happen to walk through the forest, but preferably one should open their heart and take in the forest, the smells, the feel of the breeze, and the shining sun, and the sound of the leaves rustling in the trees and crunching beneath one's feet. It's all about immersion. Sometimes awe can be found in the littlest of things, but if you aren't truly present, you'll miss it, as well as all of the benefits that awe offers. So yes, you really will benefit by receiving your regular dose of nature, but to get it, you need to be present, to truly be in the moment, to take it all in, to be immersed, to be receptive to the awe that it offers. Darwin died on April 19th, 1882. His body is buried in Westminster Abbey near Sir Isaac Newton. He was buried with full Christian honors, and one of his pallbearers was a man whose name some of you might recognize, Alfred Russel Wallace, a man who had high positive regard for Charles Darwin. However, his spirit lives on in the academy, in the practice of good science, with grit, in those who revel in diversity, especially human diversity, in those who stand bravely behind their principled propositions, and in the heart of those who are awed by nature. So, to honor Charles Darwin, I would like to encourage all of us to be 21st century Darwins, to be awed by nature, to immerse yourself in nature, to be present, to be in the moment, and to see the beauty in and back to this shirt again, the endless forms, most beautiful and wonderful, which have been and are being evolved. That's what Chuckie D wanted to tell you today.
I think you made me cry.
Well,
That was beautiful. I
I'll
don't
call
take
that
enough,
a good thing.
I don't take enough time to do the awe part anymore, I don't think. And you do need to take a minute and watch that. When you're here, I raised a caterpillar and it turned into a butterfly and we all watched it. And I really think that that's a moment of awe that it's something that just takes your breath away when you think how something can change like that from one being into another in that short of time and in that space. Amazing.
Yep,
We do have
and go ahead.
go ahead.
I was just gonna say Chuckie D is all about reminding us to experience that awe.
We do have a question on online that says, and how do we get grit?
Um, that's a good question. Today we were focusing on human well-being. Um, I I guess my personal contention would be that, to a certain extent, grit is something that, can be somewhat innate, but it's certainly something that can be fostered in others in terms of encouraging people to follow their passion and encouraging people to persevere. A lot of times, what we might think of as good parenting or setting good role models, just to do things with integrity, to follow through on commitments, to truly set goals, and to make decisions about what it means to work towards those goals. Um, and it's kind of, I love that this kind of came full circle in terms of I had read this book about awe, and I knew who the author was, knew the connection to Ekman, knew that they were both huge fans of Darwin. But oh boy, did I get excited when the dots kind of got connected, and I was like, wow, I can actually talk about awe and connecting it back to Darwin. I can talk about the value of awe, connecting it back to Darwin, who I know possessed it. To a marvelous extent, as well as grit.
Wow. Does anybody have any questions for Holly? Feel free to unmute. Or maybe tell us about an awe moment that you experienced.
No one's gonna. I'll chat a little bit and maybe give some people some time to think of things that they'd like to share. Um, I say this with some hesitancy. Part of me really wanted to kind of go nasty about the put down the phone, but I decided to try to come short of that to avoid offending people. Um, but there really is an amazing abundance of evidence that really shows how distracted we are when the phone is present. A lot of people like to think that if they're only using voice commands in the car, it's not as dangerous. What's really the problem is how attention getting that phone is. It distracts us in ways that the radio does not. Um, and admittedly, it's difficult to show that in a really powerful form, because we literally can't do experiments where we cause people to crash because they're talking on their phone. Ethics gets in the way of doing that, but we do have plenty of other evidence that really shows us how distracting it is. And my personal contention is that it's hugely risky to be utilizing the phone while we're driving. That gets a little touchy, because when we start talking about GPS and things like that, there's clearly some advantages. But when a driver is attending to something other than the road, that, for obvious reasons, becomes problematic.
Being in the moment is something I think challenges all of us. Um, it's a hard thing to do, to be 100% in the moment. And sometimes I think it takes some meditation or something like that to make me just stop and do one thing. And did you have a comment?
Yes, the multitasking, they've done lots of scientific, experiments, and really people do not multitask. They just switch focus
Yep,
quickly.
absolutely.
And so you really cannot multitask no matter what you think you are doing.
No, you're shifting back and forth. My training is in cognitive psychology, and so that I know exactly what you're talking about, and that's I try to be relatively polite and say, we really can't. And you're absolutely right. What we do is go back and forth. And when we're attending to one thing, we're not attending to another thing. And then in addition to that, the act of switching has a cost on our attentional resource. Our attention is very limited. It's kind of funny because a lot of times, if you're driving in a novel neighborhood, you turn the radio down. And what that's really pointing out is that auditory experience, hearing the radio, is enough of a distraction that it's keeping you from being focused on thinking about and looking at what you need to be doing. When you're in a familiar area, it's no big deal to have the radio on. But when we really need all of our attentional resources, that's when we're telling people in the car to shut up and we're turning the radio down.
That is true. It's kind of funny when I've caught myself doing that sometimes. It's
And
like, be
actually,
quiet, I have to think.
yes, it is funny, but it kind of goes to show the power of it.
Mhm.
Yet we're disinclined to really admit it. And then, like you said, with the awe, we always tend to think that we've got these other more important things that we allow ourselves to obsess on, when in fact what we're doing is taking away from the experience that's really that we really need to contribute to our mental and physical health.
You've been saying some good words today, sister.
Well, and the other thing that I particularly enjoy is a lot of people think of Charles Darwin only as a scientist. They only associate him with the idea of changing species across time. Oftentimes that's just summarized with the word evolution, which there's certainly nothing wrong with using that word to say that. But he really made important contributions above and beyond that I think people overlook. And sometimes if people take issue with some of what they believe that he said with regard to evolution, they're disinclined to benefit from some of the other contributions that he made. And so I like to introduce people to that side of Darwin as well.
Holly, do you think there's a book somewhere out in your brain about advice from Chuckie D?
No, but I should write one maybe.
That's what I'm thinking.
Actually, that book by Keltner, the title, and again, we've got one of these, too many words, awe, the new science of everyday wonder and how it can transform your life. That, I guess to a certain extent could be a little bit of a starting point when it comes to a narrower focus of simply understanding the importance of awe. I enjoyed it immensely. Sometimes with books like this, I have a hard time gauging what kind of a read it is for other individuals. But anyone that thinks they're okay with various versions of what I sometimes call science light, I'd certainly encourage them to give it a try.
Science light's my kind of science.
And when I say that, what I mean is, good researchers, people who are respected scientists in their respective disciplines, but writing for more of a broader audience, not people that are simply going to be reading scientific journals. And so it's that sort of a thing. So sometimes for some people it's a little heavy. Quite frankly, I've been surprised whenever I've assigned these things that students tend to like them more than I expect that they would. So maybe I don't give students enough credit. Maybe I don't give other learners and readers enough credit. I hate to recommend something that's a little bit too complex or a little bit too deep for people. I kind of prefer to make sure that it's light and a little bit more approachable. And so this, kind of falls in that category of I worry that some people that may be a little dense for some people, but maybe people should just be willing to try to bite off a little more than they think they might be able to chew, and maybe find out that they can chew it just fine. So I'll
There's
go with
where the
that for
grit
today.
is.
Yeah.
That's the grit. Does anybody else have any questions? Great. Well, I am so glad that you're back, Holly, and you here and today talking to us about great advice from Charles Darwin, and I'm taking it to heart myself today. I hope everybody else is too. Just a couple notes about the rest of the week. We did have to switch 2 of our programs. So tomorrow will be Scandinavian genealogical tips, and Thursday will be how not to name a baby. And I promise you're gonna love that, and that one's gonna make you laugh a lot too. So thank you everyone for attending. Thank you for joining us on Facebook. And Holly, thanks so much. As always, we love your classes.
And Chuckie D was so glad to get to come today.
Good. I'm so
And he-
glad
and
he's
he's-
there.
And he
I'm in
sends
awe.
his,
Thank you.
he sends his greetings to the Dalai Lama as well.
The Holly Llama is glad to see him. Those cardboard fellows got to stick together.
Yes.
All right, everyone, take care. Have a great Tuesday.